So I feel very analog coming with my whole paper block here after the very modern presentation. This is for you, Viesters.
Okay.
I brought you some candy from Switzerland because you will be talking a lot today.
I will.
So I figured you might need it.
I start to consume.
Very good. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. It's a privilege to be here with you among colleagues who not only practice photography, but also care deeply about it. Talking with people here at Vision and Voices, I am reminded that working in photography means collaborating with visionaries and, if I may include myself, hopeless idealists. When we speak about photojournalism, it is easy to paint a bleak picture. Falling print sales, low willingness to pay for online content, and AI further limiting the organic growth of our readership. But we idealists have learned to live with permanent crisis. Forecasts of decline have been around for decades now, and yet, here, we as printed media are still around. I personally learned this lesson quite early in 2016 when I began my ventures into photojournalism. I started that at Keystone, which is Switzerland's national photo agency, and I was immediately hooked on the constant stream of images I was exposed to daily. It felt like traveling the world without having to move. But only a few months into my apprenticeship, we were told that Keystone would merge with the Swiss news agency, so pictures and text would become one company. There was a lot of skepticism, then layoffs, and the agency's culture dissolved almost overnight. When I meet my former colleagues, we still reminisce about those times. The developments in journalism and photojournalism more specifically troubled me, but at the same time they also excited me. Because something was happening in journalism, and I realized that the industry had to be incredibly agile to persist. This pattern has repeated itself ever since. Mergers, layoffs, nostalgia, and adaptation. Crisis really is constant. So, to stay true to my mission, I'd like to take this opportunity here at Vision and Voices to present an idealist's outlook on the future of what must be the slowest death of an industry ever, and how it might stay on the line for a little bit longer. I would like to turn to the medium at the very foundation of the industry, the newspaper. And actually, for those interested, I brought some, of course not original copies, but some copies of the very first Zürcher Zeitung which was ever published in 1780. That's how newspapers used to look back in the day. And feel free, of course, to take one if you'd like to experience going through it. Undoubtedly a constant in the industry, the newspaper has in fact been under pressure since the 1950s. The arrival of television, first through audiences and advertisers away, followed decades later by the internet and social media, which further accelerated the decline. The COVID pandemic then dealt another blow, underscoring just how fragile the print business had become. And to me, honestly, it's almost a wonder that print is still around in the form we know today. Because if you look at the timeline of firsts in printed media, you cannot help but notice how late each step was taken. So the very first photograph, which isn't this one, was made in the 1820s. Yet when the French newspaper L'Illustration tried to reproduce a photo in 1848, which is this image right here, they couldn't print that image the way you would print today, of course. But even worse, they had to have an illustrator basically come in, and he would then carve this image into the printing plate. So it was not an actual representation of what the photographer had captured here with his daguerreotype, but it was a painting or a carving of the original image. It took until 1880 for the first true half-tone photograph to appear in a newspaper. That was the very first half-tone printed image. For those of you who don't know, half-tone basically means you are making the picture up of small dots, which are either bigger or smaller, and that's how you make areas darker or brighter. Very easy way of putting it. Social documentary photography was already developing in the 1870s. Here's an example of John Thompson. This is taken from a series of magazines that was produced in that time, which captured the lives of the poor in London, in and around London. So this type of photography was around in 1870, but photo stories, so reporting told primarily through images, did not emerge until the 1930s or 50s. The Berliner Illustrierte is one of the early adapters of photo stories, meaning stories that are primarily told through images. And of course, color, that's a whole different story, that came even slower into the printed media. L'Illustration introduced color images to its readers in 1907, but the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung waited another whole decade, so 100 years, until printing the very first color image in their paper. And what I find quite interesting is the occasion taken here to printing the very first color image. This was a talk between North and South Korea. So that's 2007. The New York Times was a little bit quicker. They printed their very first color images in 1997. In this case, it appears to be pretty random which date they took to introduce color, because it's a baseball game and then another image which is not clear to, necessary to put into the story in the first place. And my employer, the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, sits kind of in between. We introduced the first color image to print in 2005, which was a dead Pope. So I would say there's a pattern here. Every step forward, from engraving an image to then printing it in halftone and finally in color, was delayed. Newspapers have always seemed to resist change. But why? In the United States, more than 2 local newspapers close every week. And this trend continues in 2025, with nearly 1/3 of all US newspapers having vanished since 2005. This is not the fate of small experiments, but of institutions, and it underlines the paradox. By trying too hard to hold on to loyal readers, publishers end up designing for the past instead of the future. Newspapers should not be built only for those who have been here for a long time, but they should be built for those who are here for a good time. So, in our understanding, newspapers are meant to be static. They are designed to embody continuity. And when we picture a typical print reader, we imagine someone who treats the newspaper as a ritual, opening it to the same page number every day, reading the same trusted columnist, holding on to a tradition that really feels timeless. That is the readers, editors, and publishers often keep in mind when curating a newspaper. They hesitate to change too much at once, pointing to the wave of new and modern avant-garde media ventures that did not survive the last crisis cycle, as supposed proof that reinvention is too risky. But the comparison itself is flawed, because the real losses today are not happening at the margins. They are happening at the very heart of the established publishers. So as I was saying, we should design newspapers to have a good time. And there's actually underestimated potential in that, because print readers are, in fact, the most loyal ones we have. At NZZ, where I work, People cancel their digital subscriptions more than twice as often as their print ones, which means that when someone holds on to the physical product, they really hold on. That strength should give us the confidence to commit more boldly and not hesitate in developing the printed media further. Some newspapers have taken steps in this direction, although not very big steps. The NZZ am Sonntag, the paper I work for, unveiled its new design last year. I would say it feels quite magazine-like. It has more white space than it used to have. It has reduced visuals, more rhythm in the layout. And at first glance, you might think, here's a newspaper that has embraced the magazine aesthetic, that is modern. But in truth, it's still an in-between. It borrows some of the aesthetics of a magazine without fully committing to the form. You see this hesitation especially clearly in the way the weekly edition is structured. The newspaper is one part, and the magazine is another. So on Sunday, if you're a subscriber to the NZZ am Sonntag, you get the newspaper, and inside the newspaper you would have this magazine. The society and lifestyle content is pushed into the magazine section, leaving the newspaper to feel like the serious side. That separation is counterproductive, because lifestyle is not a sideshow. Lifestyle is part of the newspaper's core identity. Full commitment would mean integrating lifestyle cues into the main newspapers, not outsourcing them to a separate magazine. And here's actually the most telling part. This redesign, despite all the fears from our chief editor, did not trigger the subscription cancellations many had expected. Normally, any redesign of a newspaper comes at the cost of at least some cancellations. This time, it did not happen. That can be read in several ways. Perhaps our readers were quietly longing for change. Perhaps the old rigid structure was not valued as much as we thought. Or perhaps readers simply trusted the paper enough to accept a shift in design. Whichever way you look at it, the conclusion is clear. Change does not automatically threaten loyalty. If anything, it might actually strengthen it. Nobody buys a Labubu because they need it. That's how this toy is called, for those of you who don't know. This is like the ultimate trend right now. Everyone wants a Labubu, at least in Switzerland. They buy this toy because of what it represents, because it gives them a sense of belonging, of style, of identity. And a newspaper functions in exactly the same way. It is an object of culture. The message here is not that publishers should jump on every passing trend. But what we must recognize is that a newspaper's identity is closely tied to the same fast-moving currents that shape lifestyle culture. People read newspapers not only for information, but also for what the object itself represents. A marker of taste, belonging, and identity. That is why tying newspapers too tightly to traditions, presenting them only as rituals for long-time readers, is counterproductive. It ignores the fact that just like with lifestyle objects, relevance comes from renewal. And just so you know, I mean, none of these trends are made to last, right? That's why it contradicts the way we see newspapers nowadays. And of course, this all isn't supposed to be downplaying reporting, even though I'm literally drawing a comparison between newspapers and these things. But strong visuals are what carry journalism further. These are visually strong things we have in our lives, or we wish to have in our lives. But if newspapers are an object of culture, like a Labubu, a Tamagotchi, or a supreme accessory, then the question becomes, what gives it that cultural charge? What makes a newspaper feel relevant as these objects? And this is where finally it makes sense why I'm standing here at a photo festival where I finally talk about photography. So photography turns a publication from a wall of text into an experience. It is a crucial element in shaping identity for the publication itself and for its readers. And if we look back at the visual firsts in history, the pattern is unmistakable. Every major step forward in print was about giving photography more space, more weight, more presence. Each time, it was photography that made the title more visible, more memorable, and more relevant. So when we talk about the relevance and resilience of print today, we should see photography as the defining strength of print, and perhaps even as the secret to why print has survived at all, despite always arriving late to the party. Photography carried trends into print too, by the way, because photography can be very trendy. We have modern visual narratives, which we photograph, styles that we as photographers like and prefer. So even though the layout of a print paper could be very static, the moment you would have a newly taken photograph in it, you were always slightly refreshing that very rigid and old design. And images, of course, behave very differently depending on where you encounter them. Online, we heard this in the last presentation as well, online a photograph flashes by in a fraction of a second. It's compressed, it's cropped, it's optimized for speed and forgotten as quickly as it appeared. In print, the same image occupies space. It cannot be swiped away, it demands a slower kind of attention. And in print, photography has weight. It turns the fleeting into durable. We often say that print slows us down, but it's not the medium alone that does this. It's the photography within it. The images set rhythm to our reading. They are what makes us pause, reflect, and engage more deeply with the newspaper. And very often, the photograph is also the entry point. How often have you turned to a page and the first thing that sparked your interest was the image, and that's when you decided whether you wanted to read this article or not. And perhaps that is the quiet secret of why print has survived. Not because it has always been quick to adapt, it has not, nor because it has always been commercially strong, it is not. But because, despite everything, print offers a place where photography can live at its full potential, with weight, with presence, and with permanence. Photography is what makes print relevant, is what I'm trying to say. And photography is what makes it resilient. And that is why I believe photography is not just part of print's past, but also its best chance at a future. Thank you.